The Water Diviner is Russell Crowe's 2014 directorial debut. It tells of Joshua Connor, Crowe, and his journey to Turkey following his wife's death, in the search for their 3 sons who were presumed dead in the Battle of Gallipoli. Despite the motion picture being considered one of Russell Crowe's best action movies, The Water Diviner totaled a somewhat disappointing $35 million at the global box office. Regardless of the underwhelming response, the project quietly occupies a spot in Oscar-winning actor Russell Crowe's top 3 most important movies. Yet, The Water Diviner did face criticism during its theatrical release. Crowe created The Water Diviner, founded on his deep adoration of Australian culture. He reported that it was important to retell the notorious military campaign during World War I from an alternate perspective. The Water Diviner challenges many of the historical narratives surrounding the Battle of Gallipoli, boldly told through the perspective of the quote-unquote enemy, as Crowe says in an interview with Joe Michalexuk. In doing so, the actor hoped to reinvigorate Australian cinema and achieve his greatest career goal, which is to remain close to home. The Water Diviner was a success with its domestic audience, where it was the top-grossing homegrown movie of 2014, via Variety. The Water Diviner was an Australian passion project for Russell Crowe. Crowe has often brought his Australian heritage into his film career. Crowe frequently discusses his profound love for his Australian heritage. During an interview with The Guardian, he professed his dedication to going to the dawn services for Gallipoli. These Anzac memorials commemorate the morning landings at Gallipoli in 1915, which Crowe acknowledged is part of who he is. He has been captured celebrating Anzac Day with numerous friends across the years, including fellow Aussie Hugh Jackman. Taking into consideration his unwavering commitment to celebrating Australian heritage, it's understandable that Crowe would seek creative input on a domestic project, particularly after the number of years he has spent immersed in Hollywood. Additional to this is Crowe's outspoken desire to remain close to home. With a farm on the north coast of New South Wales, Crowe's life is in Australia, where he has an investment in his favourite sports team, the South Sydney Rabbitohs. Crowe has often proven his passion for Australia, and his endeavour with The Water Diviner was to present an alternate way of thinking to many Australians who have followed one narrative for the majority of their lives. It was important for Crowe that he told a tale of war that depicts the gravity of the circumstances, and the consequences of the tragedy and grief. The Water Diviner challenged traditional historical narratives. The Water Diviner presents the Turkish perspective of Gallipoli. Russell Crowe in The Water Diviner wearing a hat and turned to the side. Universal Pictures. Gallipoli is a momentous event for many Australians and New Zealanders. It was Crowe's belief that The Water Diviner was his opportunity to create a film that talks about war with a level of honesty that other people haven't really taken it to, via interview with Charlie Rose. Other media touches upon the war, albeit very few pieces. Gallipoli by Peter Wee, for instance, highlights the stark contrast between the two narratives. However, Wee's film is another hugely controversial war film that serves as a reminder of military ignorance. Meanwhile, it's important to note that Crowe's depiction doesn't heroicize the war. The Water Diviner opens with Ottoman troops attacking the Anzac Line in December 1915, which immediately calls into question many traditional perspectives on the war. The significance of the 2014 movie derives from Crowe's experience with the Anzac services. He recognized that Australia's sense of identity comes from a singular perspective, and 100 years later, it's time to open our hearts a little more. Joe Michalexuk. The screenplay's focus on the Turkish experience was a huge risk for Crowe, who had grown up surrounded by very particular legends of Gallipoli and could have risked domestic failure. Has Russell Crowe directed since The Water Diviner? The Water Diviner failed to see commercial success. Russell Crowe smiling in poker face screen media. Unfortunately, The Water Diviner was not the financial success that Crowe had hoped for. The relative decline at the box office meant that the actor's venture into directing has been almost non-existent. Crowe acknowledged before his 2014 release that if The Water Diviner was a hit, it would result in the autonomy he needed to bring more films to direct in Australia, meaning that he could remain close to home and his 2 sons. However, since 2014, Crowe has only directed one other production, and it performed even worse than his directorial debut.